You can follow any nutrition or exercise plan for 6 weeks, but to really make sure something lasts long term, there's something you need to know. And what I want to dive into with Mandy today is more an awareness of how fulfillment really has a role to play when it comes to nutrition training long term. And I feel like this is the aspect that's not talked about much and is not the area that people spend enough time on. And it's harder, right? It's less tangible. It's not what my calories or what my step count or etc. But if we're not taking the time to reframe the actions that we do on a daily, weekly, monthly basis, then it always is going to be something that we find hard to do or harder than it needs to be. So, Mandy, I guess before we dive in a bit more, we look at this at so many different angles with clients, but for you, why is fulfillment as important, if not more important, than the nuts and bolts of nutrition training?
I think it's really important because if you can know all the right stuff, but if you're fighting it internally and you don't actually want to make the changes, they're never going to stick anyway. Therefore, it's less about knowing stuff and it's more about how you're actually internally responding to those things that you're changing or wanting to do. And it's a big conversation that I have with clients, especially around that sort of maybe 10, 11, 12 weeks into the program mark, where they're starting to get their head around, some food changes and some movement changes and whatnot, and really kind of finding that edge of where they can just hang on and grit their teeth to. And we have this discussion around what part of this are you enjoying, like looking for the joy in the process, looking for what it's giving you, looking for how it's making you feel, and realizing that that's the part that is actually going to make this stick in the long term. And if I read this, I'm reading this book at the moment by an adult ADHD specialist, and he talks about this in the context, especially for distracted humans, I guess. But if you are going to fight the change you have to make, one, you're making the change a whole lot harder. Two, it's never going to last anyway. And so I think this fulfillment piece, which for us is enjoying the process, but also what's the ripple effect out to others that you can then create by the changes that you're making, is as important as the actual changes that we're talking about on a day-to-day basis anyway.
Yeah, I've just remembered actually, as you were saying that, the very first podcast that we ever posted, a couple hundred podcasts ago, do you know what the title was?
I cannot remember.
Ah, come on. Someone listening to this is like,
Strategy.
Mandy, you should know. It's called Enjoy the Process, right? And I think we started that very much from the start of looking at all of the things that we can improve with one's health if we make the process harder than it needs to be through the, pushing the other way against the change that we want to make, then it just seems silly. Like if you want to make the
Mhm.
change, there's going to be struggle, there's going to be frustration, there's going to be a bit of conflict against old habits or thought processes. But simply saying, I hate this, or I don't want to do this, or why does this have to be so hard, or I've done this for so long and I still haven't got results, or I can't
Mhm.
wait for this to finally to show some results, just makes it so much harder. And I think it shows up in two different ways for me. One is I've seen far too many people use the common phrase, I've been trying to do all these nutrition changes and I still haven't got any results. I'm like, surely if you eat healthy, you feel better on a day-to-day basis. Like you might not see 10 kilos of weight loss overnight, but your energy's better, you feel stronger, you feel more alert, your brain works. Like there's got to be some of those things in the short term. And when you ask them, they're like, oh, yeah, no, I feel much better, but like I haven't dropped body fat. I'm like, golly, you make that so much harder for yourself because you add that stress on top of one result. But all of those key things that you and I both know need to happen in the short term for the long approach to happen. So, we've got plenty of clients. I'm going to lean more towards the males who make the nutrition changes and they drop weight over that first 6 weeks. Now, we have that happening with women as well all the time, but there's going to be a certain percentage of people that either, if they've been dieting on and off for years, they've been under fueling or over exercising for a long period of time, there's going to be anywhere from a 2 to 6, maybe even 8 week time frame where there's just a healing process required, right? Rebuilding and replenishing everything in the body in order for things to actually work. And it's absolutely crucial for that type of client to focus on, like, wow, I actually feel better. My joints feel good. My brain feels good, like all of these other things. And I've seen both of those clients. So one that's like, okay, I'm going to put the scales to the side for 8 weeks. I can do this. I want to get my body healthy long term because I'm excited of what this looks like in a year or a decade from now. And I trust these guys enough to make that change. They follow the process. They go through the 8 weeks. They start stripping off body fat, and then they feel great because they see the weight going with it, right? But they needed that first change. The alternative is I changed something for a week. I know I've done a plan before. I lost 5 kilos and I haven't done it this time because I'm eating so much food. So it can't be working, right? And we just get more and more frustrated around all of the things that need to change everything now. But we know what that process has looked like 10 other times where we drop the weight, we put it back on, we drop the weight, we put it back on, right?
Mhm.
So I really think that that sort of longevity, a lot of people say they want that, but their actions don't show that in the short term. So, really, that ability to have someone, whether it's us or someone else, to be able to guide you through that process where you know that they've helped other people like you through that. And then actually trusting you, trusting them for what you've asked them to do with you is such a
Mm.
big part of that, right? So we can dissect that one a bit more. But there's another one that's being so front of mind for me, which is I read this book the other day that referenced to the concept of having 20 to 60,000 thoughts a day or whatever it was, but the percentages were the things that really interested me, which is that 80% of the thoughts that we typically have on a day-to-day basis are negative, right? Which
Mm.
doesn't sound surprising. I think most of us tend to focus on it's so much easier and it's more ingrained for us to focus on what's wrong than what's right. It's very evolutionary in regards to if everything was relaxed, we wouldn't be here very long. But of that, of all of the thoughts that we are having, 95% of them tend to be repeated, right? Meaning what we thought yesterday, we repeat today, right? So if yesterday we had all of these problems with the traffic and the weather and how we look, we're probably going to have 95% of those thoughts today as well. So think about how many ingrained thoughts there are around how you look, how you feel, what you eat, what you have when you're craving something, when you're tired, when you're bored, and think about how many times that they show up on a day-to-day basis because that's what happened yesterday, right? So breaking down those thoughts and those behaviors is such a hard part of it. And if you just lean into the negative, right, 80% of it being, oh, well, this is too hard, or I can't do this long term, I've never been fit, so why start now? That's been repeated a lot of times. Like you've heard that before. And I can't get that concept out of my head. Hence why I wanted to dive into it today around this whole idea of fulfillment, because I truly think that's the way to move away from this idea of we're usually motivated by pain, and we're now starting to get to a place where by having some fulfillment, some purpose, some pull rather than push, we get to a place where we can start to break down some of those repeated thoughts that are detrimental to our health.
Yeah, this topic excites me a lot for a couple of reasons. One is that very often people come into the program with, say, for example, a weight loss goal or something that they want to move away from. So there's that driven by pain, like you just mentioned, and that is motivating initially. But once that pain's gone, there's this gap, and I talk about this a lot with clients as well. That there's got to be a bridging of you're no longer moving away from something; you've now got to have something you move towards, and it's so exciting because when you're feeling good again, you've got everything kind of going for you, you get to like almost open this door on all of these possibilities of things that you can now aim for. So you get to choose all of these things. And what I think, a pattern I see so much is people who join the program and then they really jump in and get involved with, say, our mindset calls that we do and our live trainings and the podcast, and they get involved in the community. There's like this kind of seeding of potential and the seeding of all of the good that can come, which can combat those negative thoughts that are on repeat. If we isolate ourselves, we tend to get more and more negative because we feed off those things that we say to ourselves all the time. We don't even realize that we're saying them and then believing them. But when you're getting input that is positive, or you're seeing other people changing, or you're seeing other beliefs being broken, it raises this possibility in your mind that that could be you too. And so it actually allows you to start moving and through that gap into what is this, not just what can I get from this, but what can I now do with all that I now have, whether that's how you different, like changes to how you behave with your family or how you show up at work, or the possibility of options that you now have. Maybe once upon a time you couldn't do some adventure thing and now you can. Like all of those ideas can start to percolate through, and you can actually find something where you're getting that pull forward, not just a push from something that you're trying to avoid. It's like it's kind of like a spectrum, right? And there's a bridge in the middle that you've got to get over.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And I think if you're listening to this, have a little think about what's a thought that you repeat far too often, right? It's something that is either unhelpful or it's just negative and it just makes shit harder than it needs to be, right? What's that thought? A one for me for a really long time is I've been in Wellington for a really long time now, and it's been one of those areas where if I've been in routine for a long period of time, I'm like, oh, I need to go somewhere else. I need to move, or the weather's crap, or like anything, just all these things that aren't helpful. And then as soon as you go on holiday, like, oh, I really like it at home. And it's so funny how different it can be and just how unhelpful in many, many different ways it can be. And I've caught myself on this plenty of times where you have an appreciation when you're away, but when you're there, you don't really appreciate anything. And if almost you say, like, I wish I could be anywhere else but here. But when you are, it doesn't work out that way. So I don't know if that's relevant to anyone else, but certainly for me, I've noticed that pattern come through. And it's just one of those ingrained ones that if I was to say, okay, what's something that comes up and is repeated over and over again, which is not really necessary to be there, but continues to clog my brain and cognate time. And I think many of us would have an example of that that tends to show up, right? And if we could just remove some of that, imagine how much space that we're trying to create, right? And we've spent a bit of a theme really the whole way through January around improving our focus, improving our brain health. Just think about how if we were able to shift 1 to 2% towards more positive thoughts and more purpose around what we were doing with our day, as opposed to the negativity and the judgery around what we're doing now, that would have a significant impact on our overall brain health, right? I keep forgetting his name, but there's a guy in the brain health space that talks about like what wires together fires together, or what fires together wires together, right? That whole concept of if we continue to think a certain way, we continue to reinforce that action. And if we continue to, if thoughts create stress and stress creates disease, then thoughts create disease, right? And it becomes this whole connecting of the dots around Joe Dispenza, that's the guy. This thought around if I'm able to change my thoughts, I'm able to change my health, right? And that is like big, full picture. We're not just now talking about nutrition and training. We're talking about if you're still grumpy, angry, stressed, sad around a particular event that happened yesterday or 3 years ago, and it's continuing to trigger that stress response in your body, you are quite literally making yourself sicker. You're decreasing your digestive capacity. You're not sleeping as well. You're not able to focus as much, right? So to really give you an ingrained way of connecting the dots between your thoughts and your health, I think that's a really nice way to go as well.
Do you know how else I think this also shows up is when it comes to the like how you view the things you won't do? So for example, like do you view it as a restriction that you can't or you won't do such and such because you're focused on health, or do you view it as an opportunity to feel better? And then I've got an example for this because I live in Blenheim and it's just been the Wine Food Festival here, and it's a big event for Marlborough and I don't go to it. And everyone feels average, like, for half the week following because they've all drunk too much in the sun. And you can think of that. Now, I could go to it if I wanted to, but I don't. I choose not to. Now, I could view that as a restriction or something I miss out on because I've chosen to be healthy. I can't do this thing anymore. I can view it as I get to feel awesome on Monday because I don't, and I get to do all this other stuff as a result. So it really comes, and I see this all the time with people talking about, the foods I'm not allowed anymore. I'm on a diet, so I can't eat that, and I can't have that, and I don't do that, and I can't do that. Or do you view it as I don't do those because I choose to feel awesome, because I want to feel great, because I value how I feel afterwards, not just the moment the food touches my tongue and I get that kind of dopamine response from it. It's that mindset of how you approach the thing. Are you looking at it as a restriction, or are you looking at it as an opportunity to choose something else to feel better?
That one phrase guarantees that you're not going to be healthy long term, right? Like, I can't have this. Well, why are you on this health journey if it's all the things you can't do, right? Like, you're literally creating a prison for yourself in your own mind around what you can't do anymore, right? And I think you've absolutely highlighted the whole point of this, which is what are the things you can do? Like, how much better do you feel? How much better are you in your relationships? How much better is your energy? How much better is your strength? And all of these other areas. Like, what can you do? I literally wrote a little article on this yesterday, Mandy, around ultimately, I guess, our entire purpose with Body Reset is this idea of like, rather than focusing on all the things you can't have and all the things you need to restrict, focus on what you can gain and what you can get out of being healthier. Like, I think that's just such an awesome way of looking at things around fundamentally human behavior. We will always continue to do what feels best, right? Or what feels, in some cases, easiest. But if easiest feels like, oh, it's so much harder to feel good on Monday if I'm just drinking all day and I have to now do all of these things just to feel good. It's actually easier to go for a walk, to hydrate my body, have a good sleep, and I feel amazing on Monday, right? I think there's just such a reframe required there. And I think that just, coming back to the whole idea of thoughts thoughts can create or destroy your health, that's just such a beautiful connection. One last avenue that I want to go down here, Mandy, and we've talked about this a lot with our team. This is a huge theme within our coaching, is this idea of really a spectrum. And if you're listening with this, a visual, as I guess, continuum of people that are active positive versus active negative, and everything in between that, right? So if you think about the layers here, we go from active positive, which is if someone else can do it, I can absolutely do it. Then we've got passive positive, which is they did it, so hopefully I can too, right? It's not as active in regards to like prove me wrong, I can do this too, but it's a like, oh, there's hope here, I think I can do it. And then there's passive, just in the middle, which is let's hear how this goes. Hopefully it works, right? This is the person that's a little bit non-committal and can go either way, like, oh, yay, that worked, or oh, yeah, that didn't really work. And this is where we really get into the more destructive ones, which is passive negative. It worked for me, but I'm skeptical it's going to work for me, right? I'm sorry, it worked for them, but I'm skeptical it's going to work for me. And then lastly, we have the active negative, which is sure it worked for them, but it's not going to work for me, right? This is what we call the special snowflake syndrome. Everybody else it will fix, but not me because I am special, right? And that's a really, really destructive place to be because you're in a spot where you're like, well, it's going to work for all them, but I've got the special condition and it's not going to move. The really messed up thing I think about that spot, Mandy, is that area actually has its own status, which is, well, I've got this special condition, so it can't work for me. So I am different, I'm unique, and I need to be supported a different way. Now, I don't want this to come across as being non-empathetic. Any client that wants to make a change, I'm absolutely with them. But if they're going to actively destroy their ability to move forward, well, how's anyone going to help them? Because they're going to look for every opportunity. I could have 10 doors open and one door closed, and they're still going to run into the door that's closed, right? Rather than looking at all the ways that they could win. And the reason I bring this up is you can probably see how much this applies to everything we've just discussed around if I change my thoughts, I can open a door. If I reinforce what I currently know, the door's locked. How am I supposed to open it, right? Even if the key is right in front of me. And I think just being able to look at this has been a really interesting way to understand that we used a phrase a little while ago, and I want to bring it up again, which is hope is the amount of times you'll try again, right? If it doesn't work the first time you go, see, it didn't work for me, I'm special, this isn't going to work. That's a very low level of hope, but it's this negativity around, well, there's no way that I'm going to get out of the spot, right? And you almost guarantee that you'll stay there, right? Whereas if you have a high hope, you might fail the first time and the second time, maybe even the third time, right? But you continue to show up with that enthusiasm because it said, well, it worked for them. It's going to work for me, right? I've seen it work with these guys. I trust this process. I'm going to make it work. Like, just imagine how different the stress or the struggle of the first failure is when you don't attach all of this extra meaning and bullshit to it because you're like, oh, that didn't work, but I'm going to find a different approach because it's not the destruction of me individually. It's there's a tweak or something I didn't know about that structure that I need to look at a bit differently to make it work. And I think that's, I don't know about you, but that's something I keep coming back to and I think about all the time. And I actually look at clients every time I'm talking to them, which one of those categories are they in? Because I need to address the framing before I attack / attach a solution.
I think the thing I want people to take away from that is every single one of those mindsets is self-fulfilling. If that is where you are, that will happen because exactly what you said before, your thoughts become your actions, your action become your outcome, essentially. But the other part of it is, and so this doesn't come across as judgmental or categorizing and that you're one of those so you can't change, is that often it's not uncommon for people to get into that place where they are active negative about things because they've tried and failed a lot of times. And so it builds up this belief that, well, nothing will work for me. And I think that we've absolutely had people that have come in that space and, you know, when they choose to, and I ask this question of clients often is if they're wanting to make a big change where they have potentially struggled for a long time in an area is, do you believe this is possible? Do you think this can happen? Because if you truly don't believe it can happen, it won't happen. But if there's just a tiny little space there that this change can be made, we can work on that and we can enlarge that gap so that there's just a little ounce of belief there that you can. And that opens up your mindset to, okay, maybe I can do this next thing and this next thing and this next thing. And your confidence in the process can grow. So it is a self-fulfilling place to be if you choose to stay there, but you always have the choice not to stay there if you want to. you can choose to move up through those layers where you can actually prove yourself wrong, basically, of, oh, I'm not actually broken and I can actually make those changes. And we do see that happen, right? And that comes back to that piece that I said before of, it's the, you've got to actively choose to engage at that point into the environment where where you can see evidence of change being possible. Because if you're going to seclude yourself away and block yourself off into your own little world of, I can't do anything and nothing's going to work, then that will be the outcome that you will get from that. And it really highlights the fact, right, that this whole thing is more than just, you need to eat this and do this. It's all wrapped up in this bundle of what do you believe about it? What do you think is possible? It's that mindset piece so much.
Yeah, and we talked about this at length last week when we talked about how we coach our coaches to be as effective as possible with our clients. And one of the biggest changes in my coaching style is assume nothing, right? I'm not going to assume that you want this. You're going to tell me that you want this, and then we're going to find a solution, right? So coming into a discussion, Ollie, 5 years ago, oh, looks like you're struggling with that exercise here. Let me help you change this, this, and this, right? Ollie now, hey, how's that feeling on your shoulders? Oh, it's hurting. Would you like a way to look at this differently? Oh, good. Well, now I'll give you a solution, right? So there's one or two layers of permission / complete removal of assumption. Because if you say, yeah, it hurts my shoulders, but I love this, I'm like, cool, you do you. I won't give you any other options, right? Because that needs to be something that you want to change first. And for many of you listening to our podcast, I love that you share this podcast, and I love that you talk about this with friends and family. But how many times does that discussion be like, oh yeah, it sounds good, I'll have a look at it one day, right? Like, people need to want to make a change, right? And it can be the best program ever that you've changed your life and done all these things, but the family member still needs to change before they'll do the thing, right? And I think that's such a key part of just, I guess, one, the strategy from our coaching side, but also from your personal reflection of, if there's something that hasn't changed in the last few years, you either don't want it bad enough, or you keep trying the same thing, right? And it just doesn't work, right? So I think you're in one of those two categories around, if you've got a little bit of weight to lose, or your energy's not where it used to be, or your guts really become quite disruptive, you're not sure what's going on, you're in one of two categories. One, you keep doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result. Or two, you're in that place where, what was the other one I mentioned? I've completely forgotten.
You maybe don't really want the outcome that
you don't want the outcome. Yeah, exactly. It's not bad enough, right? And we had this on the Q&A last week, which was, Ollie, what do you do for motivation? I'm like, are you motivated to pick up your kids? No, I just do it anyway. Are you motivated to check your emails or reply to that person? No, you just do it anyway. I'm like, awesome. So why do you need motivation when it comes to workouts? I'm like, I don't know. I'm like, do you think if you put on another 20 kilos and you couldn't fit into your dress or into your work clothes, you'd be motivated? And she's like, yeah. I'm like, great. You're only motivated by pain right now. So let's look at fulfillment. Let's look at what this feels like, what this looks like to be motivated by fulfillment, right? And this is obviously where we started today. So for you, Mandy, let's look at this a bit more personally, because you have shared on a couple of podcasts now that you've now got into the weight training and you're, from the outside, enjoying it, right? I don't think, and I don't even know if this was initially, but has that motivation changed? Was it like, I'm a weakling, I need this to change? Or is like, wow, I think I could be so much more? Or is that something that's developed over time and has just started to reinforce as you start lifting small cows for breakfast?
I've actually thought about this a bit. Part of it is that I just like how you never like it in the moment, right? It's at the bottom of a squab. But immediately after, you like it. Like, I've never ever done a workout that I was like, I wish I didn't do that.
Yeah.
I wish I didn't do that. Apart from maybe very heavy deadlift and hurt my back.
Yeah.
But the motivation hasn't changed. But and Ollie, you've talked about this before. It's not about now I can't think of the saying. It's not about
the goal, but what it makes
but what it makes of you in the process. And I think that is what has landed for me. And from my perspective, going from never really exercising particularly much myself, apart from forcing myself to go on runs, which I hated in my 20s, it was a development of it grew. It started really small, and then it slowly built, and it slowly built, and it built, and it built, because I enjoyed the process and I liked how it made me feel. And even though you have to push through that layer of I don't really want to get up and do the workout now, over time it just becomes part of what you do, and it becomes part of your day, and you very much associate it with I do this, I feel great, that's why I want to do it again. And there's this really good positive feedback loop that starts to build. That isn't always there from the get-go though. And I think that's why it's important to know that sometimes you just need to kind of build that structure that allows you to win on default. And then over time, it's going to become this thing that you do because you've got this positive feedback loop going on. And then also thinking about what you get out of that. Like for me, just that feeling of that, the confidence or strength or whatever that was never there before. Like I was talking to my husband about this, it's changed everything in my mindset about who I am and what I do in other areas of my life as well. And I only wish that I knew about it back when I was 15, because I think it could have had quite a big impact back then.
Yeah. So it's really quite a big gain for you, I guess. Small plug on this. The big thing that I've noticed for you is that you clearly stayed curious from the start, but you also had huge confidence seeing proof in front of you every day with clients doing that, right? And I think, again, another reason that ties into the fulfillment piece and the whole mindset piece is if you see people winning doing what you're doing, then there's just more hope naturally, because you're like, oh, well, that's clearly working. Like, it's going to work for me, provided you're in the right mindset. And of course, you're someone that's in the active positive. Like, it's going to work for them, it's going to work for me. And I think you just allowed that to be something that built over time. What I was thinking of there is the fact that there's two types of people that are trying to get back into shape, right? There's the person that used to be athletic in some form, strong, fit, or something else, or a mixture, or the person that was never fit, and this is the first time they get in shape, right? Now, there's different struggles for those two types of people. The first one that used to be fit has a glaring deficiency between what they used to be able to do and what they can do now, right? And I think that can be really tough in regards to like, oh, wow, that's really slipped a lot more than I thought it would. And they need to have the humility to lean in, because if they don't, it's an unsurmountable mountain. They're in a spot where like, why even bother? But if they do get some momentum, like, and you really see them experience that feeling again, then they're just addicted to it again. They go, right? And I love seeing that penny drop moment for people who are like, I can get back in shape. I don't have to run every day, but I feel strong now. Like, this is a great spot.
Yeah.
So that's a really unique space. And I think, again, it's that initial threshold that needs to be met. Once they give it, then you just let go of the reins and they're off.
Yeah.
The second person that wants to get in shape for the first time, there's a lot of self-doubt, but it's more of an unknown as opposed to like an unmistakable gap of what you used to have, right? So in that way, I think it's very much a more trusting in the process of, well, how do I make sure that I can stick with this? And what does that really look like 2 years from now? So again, you need to have examples and proof of what that looks like 2 years down the line. And one of the things that I think I've noticed, certainly with the yo-yo dieter or someone who's done 4 or 5 diets in a row, is they know that they fail around the 4-week mark. So what happens? No matter what approach they try, they fail at the 4-week mark, right? And unless they're able to get past that threshold of it's no longer this new novel, grass is greener on the other side, but truly this is something long-term, that's really where this whole enjoyment of the process comes in. But I think also that whole, what are the stories that we're reinforcing? What are we able to really gain by doing this long term rather than what we have to restrict? Because anyone can restrict, as we started this podcast with. You can restrict for 4 weeks and suffer for a result because you have a wedding or a beach day. But if you truly want this to happen long term, there needs to be that continual growth, fulfillment, purpose of who I am. And if I just genuinely feel better about who I am on a day-to-day basis, why would I want to not do that?
Yeah, just holding on guarantees that you will have to redo the cycle many times. If that's all you're doing, you're just hanging on till the end. But I think the other part of that is for those people that are maybe they've got to the 4 weeks and they fail, they get to the 4 weeks and they fail multiple times. What I really like to do there is bring in a plan, and now your focus is not the outcome. Your focus is to show up each day, because each day takes you a step further from where you started. And your goal is to accrue as many days in a row, getting further from where you started, and just keep going. And that allows you to shift your focus from the outcome, which doesn't come as fast as we think it might. And then maybe you lose your momentum because, 4 weeks down the track and I haven't lost what I wanted to lose or whatever. It allows you to shift your focus to just show up. Just show up on the day. Just go out and do the workout. Like, don't forget everything else. Just go and do it. and then it's done, tick it off, and then just accumulate days of doing the thing.
Hmm.
And suddenly you'll realize, oh, this is who I am now. This is what I do. And
Yeah.
you don't even have to think about it.
Well, one of the cool things about an app, right, is we kind of have that gamification of streaks, right? People have done 100 workouts or 400 workouts. I think someone posted the other day, like 500 workouts completed.
Yeah.
And I'm like, okay. And what does that person look like? They look amazing because they've got proof that they did that thing for a really long period of time, right?
Yeah, yeah.
So one last thing I want to finish with, Mandy, and this is not a direction I think you think I'm going to take. What's the whole point of the podcast, right? Why go down a path that's known? I live in Wellington, for anyone that doesn't know that, and there's a cycle club that I've just found out what their name is. So it has FFC on the back. And I won't get you to guess because there might be all sorts of examples there, but FFC stands for Fat Fathers Club. And I was like, that's amazing. And they've all got their tops and they cycle around Wellington, all these things. And the reason I bring this up is that there's a playful nature to that name, right? And most of them are very athletic, very in shape, and they look great. But it's this idea of like, it doesn't have to be so serious. Like they just enjoy it. It's social. They show up and they do it again, right? And I think that's the point that you're just making with the weight training as well. And that what we see with the streaks in the app is like, it doesn't have to be a perfect workout. It doesn't have to be a perfect ride. You just show up and you do it again. And I think being able to know that there's an overarching meaning behind why you're doing that. I just want to feel fitter. I just want to feel strong. I'm not going to get old and fragile. I'm just going to show up, right? And it allows like this real serious underlying fire, but then like an almost playful layer on top of like, oh, well, that was a shit workout, but I'm coming back tomorrow. Or, I didn't feel my best. Or, oh, that weight didn't work very well. Whatever, right?
Yeah.
But it's that nice little balance. And I think that might be there's something in that. Fat Fathers Club. I loved it. There was this idea of like, I'm just going to show up and do it again. And I think that sometimes that ability to not really, if one workout goes bad, like we mentioned before, if we associate all these meanings with things like, oh, well, it must not be for me, or gyms aren't for me, or I can't get in shape, I keep failing, or, oh, that was a shit workout, I'm back tomorrow, right? Like there's just that almost bounce nature of like, I'm not even going to think about it twice. This is who I am and this is what I'm doing. And that wasn't the best, but I'm going to show up again, right? And it's just that it ultimately comes back to this sort of persistence as opposed to perfectionism that I think is so prominent in so many of our clients, that just they keep showing up, they keep doing the stuff, they have their good days, have their bad days. They don't associate meaning to themselves of attacking it personally, but they just continue to show up. And I think that requires that underlying driver to make sure there is truly a meaning rather than just getting head butted every day. But being able to have that joyful nature to things is you've got to make sure that you're looking at the world with a positive lens and being able to just continue to make it easier for yourself, because if you're beating yourself up internally, resilience becomes much harder to achieve, right? If you're nice to yourself on the inside, the world on the outside's a little bit easier. Where if you're hard to yourself on the inside, the world on the outside's pretty hard too.
Yeah. It's that whole thing of just staying curious. If you fail sometimes, it's okay. What will I do different next time? Why did that happen? You're not a failure because you failed. You failed because you tried. So just try again.
Childlike curiosity. I think that's where we'll finish it. Guys, I hope you enjoyed this podcast. It's been a bit of a different, I say a different angle, but I think this is the one you want me to go down. Only thing I'll share with you to finish on this is if obviously this is landing for you, or this is something that is relevant for someone in your life that's making health changes harder than it needs to be, just share it with them and have a chat with them about it, or just send it across and say, hey, this might be useful for you. That's all we ask. We don't run ads or anything on this podcast other than simply making sure you guys help spread the word organically, and hopefully you get something out of it too. Until next time, hope you have an amazing week.